Hey everybody, it is Wintermute, and I am here to talk about Russia's technology options in version 4. Now, they're in an awkward position in that they don't start rolling tech right away. They have to reach 15 IPP. When that happens is going to depend a lot on how your game flows and what your die rolls are for the Russian peacetime income increases. Um, the other awkward part of Russia is that one of their victory points is tied to technologies, and scoring those technologies or getting those two technologies by the end of the game, and that is jet fighters and strategic rockets. I will talk a little bit more about the likelihood of those when I get to them. But I just wanted to point out that this is something that the Russian player has to think about pretty much as soon as they're able to make their tech rolls. Am I going to try to get that point, or am I going to go for things that might be a little more practical in actually defeating the German army or whoever I'm at war with? So just keep that in mind, and I'll bring it up again. So as far as their actual technological choices, it's safe to say that most of the naval techs right off the bat are not going to be a high priority for Russia. But we're still going to talk about them just in case the game unfolds differently for you or you have a very different strategy in mind for Russia. But right off the bat, advanced mech infantry. This is a really good one for Russia um, because it gives them high quality infantry units that move fast. And a lot of times in the game, Russia will reach a point where they will, they've sort of hopefully stalled out the German offensive and they need to start thinking about going offensive. Well, advanced mech is a good way to do that. They're solid units with their stats and they can move too. And so even building regular mechanized infantry is a good choice for them. Just making them advanced is even better. And a lot of that will just depend on what your choice is in how you like to go about going on the offensive with Russia. But of course, they still defend on fives. So if you need to just drop a bunch in a city just to have high defense rolls, well, that's not a terrible idea either. So yeah, advanced mech is definitely a good one for Russia. Advanced artillery. Yeah, this is also a really good one in general because making artillery better is always good. Artillery is a good offensive and defensive unit because of first strike. And in addition to that, they get the Katyusha rocket artillery, which functions exactly like a self propelled advanced artillery, but it attacks at 5. And as far as I know, it's the only unit in the game that has a first strike of 5. Not counting fortifications because they're not a unit, but as far as units go that can actually move around. So these are really great to go on the offensive with. And they're still advanced artillery, so they do have, you find yourself with nothing better to do, you can make attrition attacks with them. Um, so yeah, advanced artillery is a solid one for Russia, kind of all round. So radar, at first glance, isn't a high priority, but it does still give them benefits, like being able to scramble from facilities an unlimited number of units. At various points in the game, you might end up with, depending on how your game plays out, your Russian Navy may survive up here and see an opportunity to come out and start messing with the Germans and then take the initiative and go after them. You may have key airfields set up and you want to just stack fighters on top of them because I have played Russia in the past where I tend to build fighters I tend to build air units with Russia and use them as my counterpunch. They have a lot more tactical flexibility because of their movement. So in this case, radar may not be a terrible choice if it comes down to really want to be able to scramble a lot of fighters. So yeah, it's not a terrible choice, but is it top tier? Probably not. But there are other things as well. The interception. Are you getting strategically bombed a lot? Does your opponent have strategic rockets? Well, now at least you've got a chance to shoot them down. As obviously is one way to deal with them. So radar isn't on the junk heap, but I generally don't see it as a first tier for Russia personally. ASW is not a whole lot here that is great for them. Having they do start with a seaplane, and the main obvious use for that seaplane is to come out and try and hit any German subs that are up here on this line that they're there trying to deny you the wartime bonus income from that line. So if you're up here and you've got a good chance of hitting it, and maybe you drop a seaplane base up here, great, you can come down to here. Well, that really pushes the seaplane out here if it wants to, or that sub out here if they want to be able to deny you that bonus. But now the British can start taking swings at it, assuming you're on good terms with the British. Otherwise, the British may just ignore it and go, well, it's your problem now. But was it really worth going after the technology in order to be able to make that seaplane go out farther and have a better chance of sinking it and having to build a seaplane base up there? Probably not. Um, but you can also have the seaplane go here and maybe hit German subs over here or something like that, or hit that convoy line for uses. But you don't need ASW to do that. And there really aren't many other places where the seaplane is going to be useful that I see right off the bat. Now, I could be wrong. Maybe, and of course, if you're over here with Russia, it opens up some opportunities for you. But all in all, I don't really think ASW is a high priority for Russia for obvious reasons. Probably not a priority at all. Improve factories. So this one is obviously very good. Now, for the basic reasons that it allows you to start dropping units where you need them better. Now, if you are, as a Russian player, going to fight for these cities and not just let the Germans come in and take one or two for free, you actually want to fight for them, well, then being able to drop 2 units a turn is obviously pretty good. Uh, if you are, and because the Russian front is so wide, you can drop five. Let's assume you've upgraded the factory installing, right? You can drop 5 units here, 5 units here, 5 units here. But if it's a turn where you're just building a lot of units, maybe you want 8 units down here because this is the front that's heating up. This is where you expect the attack to come from. So putting 8 units here and 8 units here might be your better bet to reinforce this, and you can go a little light on Leningrad that turn. So there is some tactical flexibility in terms of where you can place your. Oh yeah, I keep forgetting Oral Kursk is there because it's obviously not a city, but Oral Kursk. Now that one tends to get moved pretty early. But again, being able to just drop 8 guys right here, that's still 8 guys that the German army has to think about if they're going to go after that area. Now, maybe it's not as useful for you if you plan on moving your factories away out of harm's way so the Germans can't get them and you can't do things or you can do other things with them. So a lot of that just depends on your playstyle. But I do consider it a pretty good one for Russia just for that reason alone. Now, on top of that, they have the T-34. T-34 functions just like medium armor, but it has target selection 1 vehicle class units, and it only costs 5 IPP. So it's $1 cheaper than normal medium armor. And that's just fantastic. So yeah, now you can build 2 of those a turn. I didn't mention you can only build up to 2 Katyushas a turn. Still, both very great offensive units. Though, one thing to consider is maybe you don't want both. You just want to use the if you're a little light on tech dice, you go, well, I can either go for advanced artillery and get my Katyusha as my kind of heavy hitters, or I can go for improved factories and go after the T-34s as my heavy hitters. You don't necessarily need to go for both. And maybe that's one way you want to look at it. Okay, I'll take the T-34s. They're my preference because I prefer blitzing, I prefer the target selection, or the Katyushas, I prefer the first strike and that sort of thing. But yeah, I improved factories is pretty high on my list for Russian technologies. Improved construction. I like this one for Russia because of how I play Russia. I tend to like to fortify my cities and actually build forts there. So making my forts cheaper is nice. Um, but it's also not necessary. Now, you also may want to put a couple airfields out there and things of that nature. But other than that, it's not a huge one for Russia to get. And so while I say I like it for that reason. It's still not a high priority. It's nice if you can get it because you're a fort builder and it's going to pay off in the long term because you're going to have quite a number of fortifications on the board, or you're going to make it a point to upgrade your factories at a later date, or you're going to move some factories and then update them in their new location or whatever the case is. Or you want to go ahead and build a couple more railroads. Now, I haven't seen all the railroads for the new map, but maybe you have this habit of losing a territory that is important for a rail junction, so you want to make sure that they connect for whatever reason. Well, this all just makes it cheaper. Are you going to be pumping out sub bases and seaplane bases? Probably not, though you might do some air bases. So there is an argument for improved construction for Russia if you like to build if you like to build facilities. Excuse me. Moreover, if you've got an opponent who has strategic rockets and or likes to do a lot of strategic bombing, well, improved construction may be bumped up on your priority list because of the way it reduces damage from strategic bombing. So obviously, the minor factories get 1, medium factories get 3, and major factories get 5. And that can have a huge impact on, one, the amount of money that you are having to spend to fix the factories, assuming you want to fix the factories. And two, it may have a big impact on him not being able to deny you tech dice. And three, not being able to deny you the ability to place units where you really want them to be. Because it's not beyond the realm of possibility that a German player starts bombing Stalingrad, you know, 2 or 3 turns before he's going to actually surround it and kind of start going after it because he wants to limit your ability to build units there. Well, and that way, and he has plans for being able to come in here and start blocking your ability to move units. Then you're going to have to rail units in, and he just wants to make your life more difficult. He doesn't want you to be able to reinforce the city with ease. He wants you to have to actually uh, do it the hard way if you're going to do it, or not do it at all, making the city even easier for him to take. So, improved construction has merit, I think, for Russia, but still not a top priority, but one to keep in mind as your game develops. So, air doctrine. Uh, this one is probably pretty good for Russia. They do start with an airplane or air transport right off the bat. And it is nice to be able to have that air transport in a place that can constantly threaten the German backfield in order to make him have to garrison or draw you places so you can't just walk in for free or pull units back to have to deal with that should be marching towards the front line. Um, it's also, nice to, in any way or shape or form, just be able to, reinforce with stronger airborne units. And then if you're building the heavy transports, reinforce even better. And of course, later on, having heavy air transports may allow you to start dropping. Let's say Stalingrad is isolated, but you can get in units. You can move in units by air. So maybe dropping off artillery, an artillery a turn is going to make a difference in that fight. Make him bleed all that much more. So yeah, airborne doctrine has merit. It absolutely has merit. It's also nice to be able to really threaten. So this area down here and make him have to put units here. Or if you've got Finland, you're threatening even farther. It's even easier for you to kind of get out here. So yeah, again, I don't have a lot of experience with airborne doctrine. Is it worth it to go after compared to some of the others? I don't know. I'm not convinced it is. But again, it's difficult for me to quantify airborne doctrine until I see it in play more. And then amphibious doctrine. You're probably not going to go for this one. Now, yes, Russia does usually build transports. I usually do see Russian player build transports. They will either build one up here to be able to amphibiously assault into Finland and have options to go into Sweden if need be, and then threaten Germany and Poland and just the German backfield. So that usually does happen. I have also seen and have built transports down here in the Black Sea in previous versions of the game and in Action Allies just to threaten these two areas so that he has to keep them garrisoned. And it did pull troops back. And on maybe he leaves just enough where he thinks he's safe, but then you bring those elite airborne down, drop two of those guys off with two Marines, and suddenly you take central Romania from him, and he's like, ah, crap. So yeah, there's something to be said about Russia building actual transports, but are they going to actually go so far as to actually want amphibious doctrine and to be able to build attack transports? Probably not. The immediate benefit of not suffering double casualties in the first round of combat is nice, and that's. But you can also just make sure you have some Marines built. And is the +1 to the Marines attack to make sure you've got naval transports really that big of a buff to make it this your tech option? Probably not. So yeah, amphibious doctrine is not one I ever really see Russia going for. Uh, though I don't know if somebody has seen it, maybe they put it to good use in a way. Oh, no, that is actually before I forget, there is some merit to the possibility of it because now one of their victory objectives is the Kurile Islands. I believe it's yeah, Kurile Islands. They want to actually have that. So are they going to be do it? Are they going to be able to take the Kurile Islands with an amphibious assault? Probably not, because the Japanese will probably have something to say about that. Now, is it possible the game gets to a point where that gets pulled off and that becomes a viable option? Yeah, but do you need assault transports and Marines to do it, or will just standard transports and Marines do it? If that's even an option, probably just the standard Marines, to be honest. I see that as a more likelihood. And then, of course, the possibility of airborne. So yeah, I even with that being something they want, I still just don't see much reason for them to ever go for amphibious doctrine. So heavy armor. Yeah, heavy armor is a decent choice for the Russians. It is a high quality, hard hitting unit. Now, do you want heavy armor instead of being able to just put out two T-34s a turn? Well, they heavy armor costs $7 a pop, but their stats are better. You know, they attack their attacking defense is too higher. But one of the reasons that heavy armor is nice is it has that target selection one, but you already have that with the T-34s. So even though heavy armor is a still a very solid option for the Russian player, I think you're probably better off just going for improved construction and trying to get the T-34s overall. Now, again, that's not having played fourth edition a whole lot, so that's just sort of looking at the numbers. And now and of course you can only build two T-34s a turn, as opposed to heavy armor, where if you want to drop $28, you can build four a turn or even more. So there is the limit. There's no limit to the amount of heavy armor you can build. So what is what do you want out of it? What are you looking for in the end game? And that's you're just gonna have to weigh the pros and cons there. But I personally would still probably value factories. Excuse me. I think I said improved construction, improved factories more than heavy armor because of the T-34 option. Oops. Where do we go? Okay, there we go. Jet fighters. Now, jet fighters is a solid option for the Russia, yeah, for the USSR because they're just good stats. They are costly. They do cost a pretty penny. But in the late game, if the war is not going terrible for you, you should have the ability to put them out. And it cannot be overstated that it is worth a victory point for you. So if you are kind of like what I used to be with the Russian army, the Russian army, where I like to use aircraft as my punch, then jet fighters make sense to go after because I will continue with that doctrine and I will continue to build. Now I'll just build jet fighters instead of regular fighters, and I'll have all that much more attack, and I'll have interception value, higher interception value if needed. And so yeah, they're not a terrible choice. Again though, and this is going to be there are probably technologies that will be a little more practical than jet fighters and be able to have a greater impact directly on the front itself than jet fighters. That isn't to say that they won't, but because they've got a high price tag, you're inherently going to have less of them on the battlefield than you are, because you can buy one jet fighter or you can buy three advanced mechanized infantry. Which is more desirable? Well, you're going to have to be the one to make that call. But jet fighters, they're not. I'm still debating whether, for me personally, they're a top tier or a kind of a secondary tier, but they're definitely up there. And then long range aircraft. Yeah, this is absolutely a solid one for Russia. The better movement for strategic bombers and heavy bombers, absolutely. All other aircraft gain +1 movement. And again, that is you have a smattering of air bases around, and so it's pretty easy to land at an air base if that's an important thing. And just be able to reach out and touch somebody all that much farther and easier is just great. It's just a good thing for Russia to be able to do. Um, and if you've been able to husband your existing air force into the late game, it just makes your flexibility and where to put that firepower during the combats all that much easier. Um, and if you were like I used to be, and I still may be as the meta progresses and as I get more comfortable, if you're somebody who just likes to build aircraft, particularly with Russia, well, then long range aircraft is kind of a no brainer. Of course, it's also a little harder to get than some of the other ones. So you're going to have to weigh a lot of that. But it's just good. It's good. Um, excuse me. It's just good overall. It's good for most nations, to be quite frank. Advanced subs, probably not. Um, Unless you are having an absolute runaway game with Russia, and you could even consider spending money on subs to go mess with the uh, German uh, convoy lines, and God forbid you're actually maybe at war with the Allies and you think about hitting them, you're just going to build regular subs. The idea of going for advanced subs from the beginning of the game or as soon as you can in order to do something like that is I think it's really a long shot. Uh, Now maybe you're going to play the what is it? East versus West expansion, where the war kind of kicks off, and so the but the Third World War between Russia and the Allies kind of kicks off, and for a longer game like that, where you're going to have another I believe it's 6 months, because it kind of kicks off right after World War II, is one of the scenarios you can play. Maybe Russia wants to plan to be able to have subs to be able to go out and start raiding and things like that, and they do want advanced subs because they're harder to sink. But other than that, in the base game, yeah, I just don't see it. I really don't. And large ship construction, yeah, for the same reasons as advanced subs. It's a naval tech. Russia just doesn't play the naval game, and if they do, I think they're better off just making do with what they have available rather than going for these advanced technologies and just splashing them in the water if they want to like build a navy somewhere late game or something like that. Heavy strategic bombers, yeah, these are actually a decent choice for Russia, but they're still not a high priority for me. Uh, it is nice to be able to get out there and bomb German factories, just and return the favor for what they might be doing to you in your factories, which are near the front lines. If the front lines are stable enough and you can plant them in the right spots, you can come out and start bombing their factories, and it's always nice to be able to do that. You're costing them money, you're slowing down their ability to place units on the front, things like that. Um, but it's a difficult tech to get, and they're not cheap to build. Would you be better off just investing in a couple medium bombers and using them with their slightly shorter range and not dealing enough damage? Well, maybe you're going to have to make that call as well. So heavy strategic bombers they're not a top tier one for me, but again, if you like the Air Force, if you like going, and somebody pointed out with my last video, sometimes it's nice to be able to just kind of go with an air heavy strategy, and just go, okay, well, I'm going to go jet fighters, long range aircraft, and I'm going to go heavy strategic bombers. And that's the I want to play strong air war with this nation, which whatever nation you're talking about. You know what? I get that. That makes total sense. And so there, and sometimes when I talk about these texts, I am talking about them kind of on their own merits. But if you want to, if you're mine, and I admit I don't necessarily do this, but if you want to kind of pair them up or group them up in a way that you think they complement each other, makes perfect sense. And so, if you are going to go with jet fighters and you are going to go with long range aircraft, well, maybe, hell yeah, let's go with strategic bombers and let's really reach deep into Germany and hit their factories and drop off airborne and just mess with them all sorts. And we're going to have our long range jet fighters escorting our heavy strategic bombers, and we're just going to wreak havoc on the German forces that way. You know what? It makes complete sense. I get that. I think that's a viable way to look at it. So if you want to lump them together like that, maybe the way you would prioritize It raises the priority of other ones that I'm sort of not putting on a high priority or a top tier. And then strategic rockets. Strategic rockets is, again, not a terrible one for Russia. But you got to kind of consider, where am I going to be able to deploy them? Well, if the front has stabilized and you see opportunities to build them and get them in a place where they can hit facilities, well, then great. But you may not always have that option, and it may not always be the best idea. Now, let's say the front line is kind of like along here, and he's really railing units into here, back over here, and you want him to build, you want to stop that, so you build a strategic rocket here. So you go 1, 2, 3, and you start strategic bombing here, or some variation on that, so that that rail line doesn't run this way. So if you damage the rail lines here, that does mess up with his ability up to kind of rail into this area, assuming you possess Oral Kursk. So yeah, there's merit to doing that and stymieing that and making his units stop short of where they need to go. And or if he has factories or has built factories in places where you can reach, well then yeah, slowing down his production, dealing damage to the facilities, making him pay for that, and then slowing down his ability to place units and reposition them where he wants to. Yeah, using strategic rockets for that purpose makes sense. And so it is absolutely a viable option for the Russian player to do. Uh, but and again, this is a victory point. It's a victory point for them. But you only get it on a 9 or higher. So that's only a 25% chance each time you play, or each time you roll the dice, excuse me. So that can be a little frustrating, it can take you a long time to get them, and then, you still got to build them and get them into the positions where you need them. So in terms of immediate benefit, there are other techs that I think are going to pay off way quicker, way sooner. But this absolutely has value, not just because of the victory point, but because you can use it in a way to stymie the German efforts when it comes to them doing what they want to do in Russia. So it's top tier because of the usefulness and the victory point, but how do you feel about going for the victory point versus having to get more practical techs available to you earlier in the war? You're going to have to make that judgment call. And the last one is improved logistics. I actually, again, this is a newer tech, so sometimes it's a little difficult to judge, and its usefulness isn't obvious right away. I actually think this is a decent one for Russia. If you can get this technology before, so doubling your strategic rail movement in all regions. So if you can double your strategic rail and movement from 2 in Russia from 2 to 4, that does open up a lot of opportunity for you. It really does. And even pre-war, as Russia, having units slog from the factories down to some of these other areas where you might want them. If I build a marine here in I can't remember the name of the city right now, Kiev. If you build one here in Kiev, a marine in Kiev, 1, 2, 3. Now let's say you want to put him in Crimea to have him available for your troop transport down here. Now you can go 1, 2, but that's still 2 turns of just walking. So sometimes even pre-war, just walking your units to where you want them to be can be a real chore with Russia. So being able to double your rail capacity and zip guys back and forth all that much easier actually would feel great. It would feel great. Obviously and then if you're actually successful with Russia in pushing the Germans back and taking some of this territory, well, then the ability to switch gauges and reinforce right up to those lines, well, that's great. That's fantastic. So this technology is absolutely, I think, worth it for Russia in that sense. And you know what? I actually forget, and I want to read this now, and I meant to look this up before I started this video, but I forgot. But we're going to go ahead and read this special ability. Factory movement. Once at war with a major power. So, okay, they get that bonus of using the ability to move their factories immediately when they're at war. just inherent as opposed to having to wait for improved logistics. Now, if you have a German player who wants to wait to go to war with you, but you get this technology before they go to war with you, you can still use this because I don't see there's nothing. Yeah, there's nothing that says you that all this. If you get this soon with Russia before the war even starts, well, you could start you moving your factories right away. You don't have to wait to be at war. And so that might allow you the freedom to move these factories off the front line or move Orel Kursk somewhere where it's safer or move this one in Novosibirsk up here or over to the Far East, whatever you feel like. So that option it's nice to have that option. Though, will you get it because it needs a 9 or better? Will you actually get it before the war starts? Especially, it depends on how long the German player wants to wait before they attack you. Yeah, it's odds are you won't have it for more than a turn or two before he declares war on you. So is it really worth it just for that reason? No, probably not. But it was still nice to be able to pre-position your factories in places that you're going to be comfortable with. And that frees up rail to use on those early turns of the war that you can use for other purposes if the factories are already in places you want them to be. And now your rail capacity is doubled from the beginning of the war. So that's going to feel pretty good as the Russian player. I'll tell you. Especially if you have decided that that war on the East Front is rough and you need to bring some guys from the Far East. Well, we got to reinforce, or vice versa. This war's over here. This front's doing just fine. We need to put some more pressure on Japan and maybe eventually go after Manchuria. Well, let's get 4 guys over here, and that's a big swing. That's 2 guys per turn. The Japanese player can easily match. You start putting 4 guys over here a turn, the Japanese player is going to be a little more hard pressed to match that to keep up their defenses here. So yeah, I like improved logistics as an option for Russia. I think there's merit to it. Again, though, some of the other techs are easier to get. You'll probably have them sooner, and they will have a greater impact on the front lines right away and the flow of the war right away. So while I like improved logistics for Russia, is it a top tier choice? Probably not, because it's still a 9 to get. But man, I do want it. I really do want it as Russia. So another thing that I'm going to bring up real quick. Now, this is a chart that somebody sent me, and I have not verified any aspect of this chart. Now, I believe this is. I don't have any problems with this kind of the way he kind of plans it out here. But and I will probably do in a different video about this because I want to ask him a couple questions. But this is a layout of the statistical probability of being able to score the victory point for Russia and or the U.S., the only 2 nations that have victory points attached to technology, and what the probability is of scoring it based on the number of turns that you have been rolling for it. So this is a really interesting breakdown, and I'm guessing the designers have a breakdown like of this very similar as well. But I'll probably do a whole separate video on that because I've got a couple questions for them that I want to clarify before I do it. But that is something I do want to discuss, and I think it is worth bringing up. And it's nice to know those numbers going into the game in a way that is so you can kind of have a very relatively informed decision as a Russian player as to what you want to do. Do I go for the easier techs that will have a bigger impact on me withstanding the German attack, or do I go say no, we're gonna go for the victory point right off? Now you can certainly switch gears mid game, but that's gonna depend on a lot of factors. But this is probably a topic for a different discussion. But I did want to bring it up real quick before I wrap up the Russian video because it is worth mentioning that that is something to consider as the Russian player. And of course, I'll retouch on this when it comes to the United States. So, all right, I'm sure there are other variations on how people feel about these, and maybe something I missed and worth. If there's any points you think are worth bringing up, feel free to leave some comments below. But for right now, this is the Russian video, and we will have Japan hopefully in a couple days. Wintermute signing off from the think tank.